Sister Diane Olmstead. I entered in 1980. I keep wanting to say 1880, 1980.
So you told me a story earlier about how you met the MSCs for the first time and how you decided to join the Institute. Could you tell me about that?
Sure. Actually, when I first met the sisters, I met them at Cabrini College, now called Cabrini University, but at Cabrini College. My family lived, I guess, about a 20-minute walk from there, and so I would walk from my house to the university to go to church because I wanted to go to Mass. My parents both worked. I had no car, so it was walk if I wanted to go to Mass. So I would walk down to Mass, and I would be there for a few days, and sure enough, one of the sisters, because we had sisters there, Cabrini University is one of our works, and Sister Bernadette Anello was there working in pastoral ministry. And she noticed that I wasn't one of the students, that I had to be somebody else. So she wanted to know a little bit about my story, who I was, and so she said, why don't you come over and have some coffee, tea, whatever it is that I wanted. And so began a relationship, getting to know Sister Bernadette. I was actually part of another religious community at the time. I was with Mother Teresa's community, the Missionaries of Charity. And so I was in a time of trying to decide, was I going to go back with them because I had just spent a year in London and wasn't quite sure I wanted to take the next step, which was into the novitiate. And so they suggested that I go back home and think about it a little bit. And while I was there, as I said, was nearby Cabrini, so I would want to go to church. So that's how I first met them and began a long story of getting to know them. I did go back with the sisters and stayed there for another 6 months. And when I came back, I did decide to leave that community because it wasn't the right fit. It wasn't the right fit for me. I still felt I had a vocation. I actually met Mother Teresa and we talked, and I said, it's not that I don't think I have a vocation, it's just not to this community. So she encouraged me, and so then I met the missionary sisters.
So I have a separate question. How do you say no to Mother Teresa?
Easily. I mean, we were engaged in a conversation, and she was easy to talk to. She was a straight person to talk to, and she really clearly wanted what was best for me. In 1976, she was in Philadelphia for the Eucharistic Congress, I think it was, and I actually met her again there, and she had suggested why not think about, they had a kind of a contemplative branch to the community if I was interested in that, would I want to join that branch? And I again said no, and said I still think I want to be a missionary, which missionary sisters, missionary community was one of the things that drew me.
So now you've come into the Institute. What are some of the places you've been missioned or kinds of work that you've done?
Sure. Well, I entered in Philadelphia. Well, let's say, no, I actually entered in Brooklyn because I was a candidate in Brooklyn. I was named a candidate in December of 1880. See, again, I keep doing it. 1980, because it was the anniversary. 1880 is when we were founded, and so I was a 100th anniversary person. So I entered as a candidate, was in Brooklyn. So I was living in Brooklyn in the community there and working at a hospital in New York. So that was my first mission. Then I went to the novitiate, which was in Philadelphia. While I was there, we always had some sort of a pastoral experience besides just classes and so forth. And so I worked in a women's shelter and worked with the people there. It was really a blessing, and help people with shower, give them clothes. Probably my most interesting experience was going to visit a homeless person, and it was down in the basement, and bang on the door because she was hard of hearing, and I walk into the house, and there are mice and rats all over the place. They were wires, and they were running along the wires, and she kind of gave me a little seat, and I sort of sat on the seat there and watched as the mice were running around and so forth, but I stayed, and we had the conversation before I left, but they eventually got her a much better place to live, which was a blessing. So that was that, and then after that, I went to West Park, where we had St. Cabrini Home, which was, we had children, adolescents that we cared for up there. And while I was there, I did nursing as well, because they had to have a nurse for the infirmaries, so I did that. And then after that, they asked me to go to Philadelphia again, but this time we had a residence for our own senior sisters. So I was the administrator there, working with them there. After that, I went to Chicago and was in Chicago as a nurse again, worked in Columbus Hospital and did oncology and med-surg nursing. So I did that. So my first years really were in nursing, mostly in nursing. And then just before I made final vows, or just after I made final vows, I then went to Guatemala and served in our mission in Guatemala, also again as a nurse. We had a clinic there, and so I was helping run, the clinic there, struggling, learning Spanish, trying to learn my Spanish. And that was, my time in Guatemala was very, very special for me. Not just in the way and how it changed my whole perspective on life, because we have our U.S. life of what we're used to. But in Guatemala, I learned to see with different eyes, I guess. And it changed my relationship with Jesus, too, because I began to meet Jesus in the people, and it wasn't just in my head. I think it got down into my heart and with the people. And I was always amazed that they never complained to God. There was always God was companion to them. And that to me was, God just became your companion and was with you in the good times, but also and especially in the most difficult times. So they weren't about blaming God for, why is this happening to me? No, they were just we're so grateful that God is walking with us and is with us in all these times. So it was a powerful experience for me to be there. And but then after that, I was pulled out and I did some study, got a certificate in cross-cultural ministry, and then at Marinol up in upstate New York. And then after that, I worked in a parish for a while. So I was in a parish. And then after that, I did 10 years worth of vocation ministry. And then after that, what did I do next? I worked in another parish, St. John's Parish, which again was one of those mission sites that I really loved because I did catechesis with the children. I worked with the parents. I helped at the local nursing home doing Eucharistic services with the residents who lived there. I eventually became the pastoral associate, worked hand in glove with the pastor and with the associate there. So it was just really a great experience in mission. And then the last 15 years has been in the service of really serving the community through leadership. So I was a counselor to the provincial, I was a treasurer for the province, and currently I am the provincial.
Yeah, I want to go full circle. You met the sisters at Cabrini College.
Right.
What's your relationship to Cabrini University now?
Now I'm on the Board of Trustees. I've been on the Board of Trustees for probably almost 15 years. It's been a long time that I've been. I actually did have a time at one point where I took some classes at Cabrini, but now I'm on the Board of Trustees. So, it's nice to find roots there.
Thank you. Okay. So when you entered the Institute, you were somebody who had been contemplative before. What did you understand of the charism at that time?
You know, I think charism is one of those words that most people, lay people especially, might not necessarily even think about. You know, we don't think about we talk about the spirit of an organization. And so it's probably more the spirit that I would say, because I certainly wasn't familiar really with the word charism. So I think what captured me was the spirit of generosity, the spirit of hospitality, the sense of really how the way in which they engaged people, the dignity with which they treated people, and their relationships among themselves. They were joyful people. And, you know, I think the other thing that I really was captured by was everybody was so different. It wasn't like, you know, in the old days, there was this sense that you joined a religious order and you almost felt like you lost yourself, were poured in a mold, and now we're all this community. There was none of that, believe me, because our sisters are all very, very unique women. But most important was their life of prayer. I mean, their dedication, their sense of being connected to Jesus, and for us especially, Sacred Heart of Jesus, is central, because that's the motivation. That's what pushes us to do everything that we do, is to share that love of Jesus with people. But Cabrini was always like, you don't just share it with words, you have to share it with action. And so you really get that sense that everything we do is about somehow communicating God's love to the person.
You've taken me from when you entered to now, I believe, how you see the charism. But you lived in community, and I think you still live in community.
Yes.
What's that like?
Community is one of the most wonderful and also one of the most challenging of experiences, you know, because exactly as I said before, we're all very different. But my novice directress, Sister Therese Miranda, used to always say to me, it's by no accident that you live with the person you live with, and that somehow it's part of your formative journey. You know, and so with each person, you learn something new about other people, but also about yourself. So, I mean, I've been blessed to really live with some really wonderful, wonderful people. And even I remember as a novice going to Chicago and living in a community there with everybody who was working at the hospitals. And, you know, I was just like a kid. Most of these sisters were older. And yet they accepted me, and it was I think it was during Lent, and there was this new program, or not a program, it was like a prayer journey that you could use during the Lent season, and they let me lead it, you know. So it was that sense of that, you know, and I was even asked one time to give a talk, you know, on the charism, on the missionary sisters, and I thought, here, I'm just a young person entering the community. But there was really that community has made me grown. I've felt stretched in every way possible. But it is really a gift, because the witness of the people, and there really is a genuine care for one another. And as I said, it's not that it's without its challenges. There's always going to be some clashes here and there, because we're all different. But you overcome those. And I think that prayer in community is the great unifier, you know, because you remember who you are, why you're there, and whose you are. You belong to God. So it can heal a lot of things. Okay.
So you mentioned a couple of things. You mentioned visiting the lady who was experiencing homelessness. Mm-hmm. You mentioned how Guatemala changed you. Can you think of one example, one life experience that really touched your heart as a sister?
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is when I was no longer missioned in Guatemala, but after that there was the Hurricane Mitch, that really devastated a lot of Nicaragua and different places. And so we were here in New York, we were connected with the Catholic Mission Association, and they were looking for, people, or they wanted to sponsor people who would go. So myself and Sister Barbara Staley, the two of us actually went to our mission in Nicaragua at that time, and stayed with the sisters there, and then went out into the various areas to distribute medications, to talk to the people, bring clothing, food, whatever we could do to help. And again, it was an experience for me at that particular time. It might sound different, but at that time, I was really kind of saying, with spiritual direction, because we all do spiritual direction, it was kind of like, well, what's your name for God? What's your name for Jesus? And through that experience there, I came to know what my name was, and it was Emmanuel. God is with us. And that's exactly the people there. It was this sense of, it was the worst time of their life, and yet they knew God is with them. I mean, they had witnessed either children or friends being taken away down the river because of flooding, entire homes lost and destroyed, bridges totally gone that were just destroyed by the water. And yet, again, it was their faith that kept them going. And they just really nourished my faith. I received so much more. It seems like a trite thing to say you get so much more, but I really did. And it was maybe there for 2 weeks, but it was really, I tell that story over and over again of coming to know God is with me. God is with us always. So
Beautiful. Could you describe your current ministry?
As provincial. I was, prior to that time, I was counselor and then treasurer and in the provincial office for a number of years. And so, it was like, oh, yeah, I'm going to know what it's all about and everything. Well, when you sit in the chair, it's a lot different to be the person that now has to give the answers or make the decisions. Or you don't do it by yourself, obviously. You have a counselor, you have other people that you're always talking with, and hopefully, you're doing that is not trying to think you do it alone. The most important thing is to realize that it is God that's going to give you the strength to do it. Because if you don't have a life of prayer, being in leadership could just destroy you. But it's really about the sisters. It's really about saying, are we who we claim to be? And are we being a witness of God's love in the world? And so it's accompanying sisters, it's accompanying the various ministries that we have. We have schools, hospitals, outreach to immigrants. In all that we're doing, are we about that? Are we about somehow demonstrating that God loves them? And we do it in very concrete ways. And that's Cabrini. She did it in very, very concrete ways.
As an MSC and as a bearer of the love of Christ, what's been most fulfilling, personally fulfilling to you?
Just being part of something that's much bigger than myself, because there's Diane, but Diane's part of the Institute, part of the Missionary Sisters of the Sacred Heart that has over 100 years of being in existence. And so you're part of a bigger story, and really part of the bigger story of the gospel, the good news, and just the gift to be able to be part of that. That's what I would say, really, the gift of that.
What would you say to someone who's considering coming into the MSCs?
Yeah, I would say that, I used to always talk to them about, does it feel like a right fit for you? My first time going to Brooklyn and being in Brooklyn, I felt immediately at home. I was up there doing the dishes and helping and doing this. It was a sense of feeling at home. There's many religious communities, and most young people have very little knowledge about the various different communities. So I would explain about that, and then I would explain about the vows. There's only You know, there's the three vows, but they're lived very differently from one community to the other. But mostly I said, you have to go, you have to visit, you have to see if you fit. Don't be afraid. Be a woman of prayer, because prayer and your relationship with Jesus is central. That's what it's all about. If you don't have that relationship with Jesus, then don't even think about religious life.
What has it meant to you to be a missionary sister?
Wow. Being a missionary sister has been almost like a love affair, because it's a passion for God, you know, falling in love with Jesus. There's this great prayer, you know, supposedly it was written by Arupe, but not really. It was written by somebody else, where it says, fall in love, stay in love, you know. And so it's been about falling in love with Jesus and Jesus's people, and then staying in love by nourishing the relationship, doing all that's necessary to keep that relationship going, because it's all about relationship with God, relationship with God's people, living the dream, you know. So, but it's really been fulfilling. I feel I have a purpose in life, being part of something bigger than me, and being able to share in that love story, if you will, of the missionary sisters.